Hey folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris on the Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel. Once again, today coming to you live from central Pennsylvania. And it looks like my return from Wyoming, a state that's kind of libertarian and very conservative. Looks like I'm in the mood and the swing here for my segment, Liberty Under Assault, as we talk about politics in the USA this week. Yesterday, my guest was Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, the esteemed military historian from the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Wow. I don't know what to tell you other than wow, wow, wow. I really enjoyed that conversation. It was a great interview from my perspective, especially when we started talking about the Thucydides trap. It was great to get his view on that, and it seems that we agree wholeheartedly about that being a bit of a fallacy, the Thucydides trap. So Dr. Victor Davis Hanson then followed up by what for me was a pleasure. For the first time in my entire adult life, I actually spoke to my own political representative, as we had Representative Dawn Kiefer on the channel from Pennsylvania's 92nd district here from the state legislature. We talked about the capricious behavior of the big bad wolf, Governor Tom Wolf, and his overreach and his unconstitutional lockdown procedures. But today we shift focus just a little bit, and I'm going to bring on a young man who's quite impressive. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. This is Daniel Martino. He's a Venezuelan freedom activist, an economist, a speaker, a commentator, and a writer. After fleeing Venezuela for the United States back in 2016, he's dedicated himself to explaining how socialism destroyed his homeland, advocating for its freedom and stopping this ideology from ever becoming embedded around the world, particularly here in the United States. And we're going to talk to him about being a political refugee and asylum seeker and how he came to the United States, and also talk to him about the ravage that's occurred in Venezuela, the country that was the jewel of Latin America until just 20 years ago. Now, there was always wealth disparity. That's a legitimate point to argue here, and we're going to talk about that. But Chavez and his minions have utterly destroyed. People are eating from trash cans and starving, a country loaded with natural resources and human capital. And we're going to talk about that. So, folks, with that, I'm going to bring Daniel in right now. Daniel, welcome to the program. There he is. Turn your mic on there. Excellent. There he is. Hey, Daniel, welcome. I'm real excited to get you on the program. I saw a video you did a while back, and I was like, I got to get this kid on my show. No, it was a different one. Maybe Heritage did it. I don't recall. But you sat there kind of like, I don't know, it was like on a park bench, and you talked about the lunacy that took place and how you grew up in a country that just fell apart around you. So let's tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're now working towards a PhD, I presume, in economics at Columbia.
Listeners and viewers know about me. I was born in 1999, so I'm 21 years old. I was born in January. That is just 1 month after Hugo Chavez won the presidential election in Venezuela. And so I never had the opportunity to live under a different regime under my childhood, right? And I came to America when I was 17. I had finished high school in Venezuela, and I knew as I was in high school that I didn't have any opportunity staying, right? The best future that I could have had in Venezuela was getting a job after college there and being able to eat. That's the best case scenario. The worst case is what's happening to the average Venezuelan today, right? Which is that they're eating from the trash, as you said. It's very sad because I saw it myself. I saw whole families, the mom, the dad, and 2 children eating from the trash together. That is what's happening now. And it makes you want to cry. People fighting for spots of where to eat from the trash, fighting with knives like animals. It's insane. That's what socialism has reduced a very rich country to. When I was a kid, most Venezuelans could travel. People were, we were not the richest country in the world when 20 years ago. We had been the richest country in the world many, many decades ago. But 20 years ago, we were an average country where my family, for example, earned thousands of dollars a month, 2,000, 3,000, which is what an average American family makes. But when I finished high school in Venezuela, we were making $2 a day.
$2 a day, which barely is now below the United Nations extreme poverty line, which is $2.60 per day. It's very sad.
Yes. So all of this happened because of the socialist policies of Chavez. And it's what made me wake up and made me be interested about economics. And that's why I came to America to study economics. And I finished my degree in Indiana University in December. Now I started a PhD at Columbia. and hopefully focus my dissertation. I'm still undecided, right? Because I still have many years left, 5 years, the program is. But as of now, the focus is probably going to be how to make a successful transition from a socialist planned economy to a free market capitalist economy, so that what happened in Venezuela can be solved, so that once this country is free, so that once Cuba is free, Belarus, Nicaragua, all these places that are oppressed can become successful capitalist countries.
Well, listen, Daniel, you may have to hold on to your dissertation and save it for America the way we're going with these lunatics here running for Congress and advocating for socialism. It's not just crazy Bernie Sanders anymore. You've got a whole cabal of these lunatics who've never lived under socialism. Now, I'm in a unique situation. I haven't lived under it, but I've dealt with the ravages of it from having been stationed around the world and seen the impact that socialism has done. But you've seen it up close and personal as a kid growing up. It must be heartbreaking for you to see your homeland in the distress that it's in now under Chavez and Maduro. It's unbelievable.
Yes, and you're right. In Africa, it's countries like Angola, people don't talk about it, but Angola has been under a socialist dictatorship for more than 40 years. And I feel like we have a lot in common, the Venezuelans, with many African people. And it's because when I've talked with African immigrants in the US, people from Zimbabwe, people from Angola, their stories are strikingly similar to Venezuela's. And so I feel connected. It's easy for me to make friendships with them. But at the same time, it's sad, right? Because it means that the same policies have the same results everywhere they're implemented. No matter the culture, no matter the geographic location, no matter the language, socialism always destroys the population. And the specific policies that means are, government taking over private businesses. It means when the government controls prices that businesses can charge. When the government decides to overregulate, all of that destroys private businesses, means less jobs, higher prices, lower standard of living.
Daniel, I think you're being entirely unfair. We know that the government only exists for our mutual benefit and welfare, and that they have only the best intentions, all governments. Isn't that the case, or am I mistaken?
Well, look, even with the best intentions, the same policies produce the same results regardless. Now, if we want to talk about intentions, the people who are in power in Venezuela and the people who are in power in most of these other, quote unquote, socialist countries, they implement these ideas, most likely not because they're socialist, not because they believe in them, but because they know it's the surest path to the misery of their population to keep them under control.
And for power, that's the bottom line. Look at Zimbabwe. Look at what's happening in South Africa today. We've seen it in Venezuela. It is the quickest path to absolute power, so you can do what you want and live the elite life that you feel you deserve.
You know what's happening now in Caracas, where I'm from? It's a beautiful city. In the background, there is a huge mountain that is tropical. So it's basically like the lungs of our city, right? So it absorbs all the carbon dioxide, so that there's no pollution and anything. It's a national park. It's always been a national park that looks upon the city. Now socialists talk about the environment, but now it's been completely ravaged because the socialist elite of the Maduro regime likes the park so much that they decided to completely destroy it and build their own mansions looking upon the city while the people starve below them.
Swearim DJ is, I'm going to get to his comment in a second here. I disagree with what he said because capitalism has never actually been practiced in Latin America with the exception of Chile by and large, but I'm going to get to that in a second. But Brett Sessoms gave a super chat. Brett is from Mississippi. He's tuned into Africa pretty well, and he has an interest in Latin America too, but Africa is more of his focus. But Brett asked me to ask you to please discuss Maduro's colectivo gangs. Do you know anything about that?
Yes. Look, the colectivos had started with someone called Lina Rong. She died around 2014, 2013, but the regime continued with them. They started as an organization called Círculos Bolivarianos, Bolivarian Circles, and they were initially groups of motorcycle gangs. In the US, motorcycle gangs are great, but in Venezuela, the motorcycle gangs have a different reputation.
Well, no, don't get it wrong, Daniel. Some of our motorcycle gangs also have a bad reputation, being involved in prostitution and drugs, but by and large, they do have a positive reputation. But we have to be honest there, okay?
Okay. I had never heard any bad story about.
Oh, that's true. It's true, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway. So go ahead. Sorry.
But no, in Venezuela, motorcycles are how they steal from you. You know, you're in your car, in let's say there's traffic, the motorcycle stops next to you, knocks on your window, give me everything you have, or I kill you. That's how crime happens in the streets, and it's in motorcycles. So these motorcycle gangs were used once there was a protest from the opposition to Chavez, back when he was alive. They would come to the protest armed and terrorize the protesters so they would leave.
This sounds,
sometimes they would kill them or kidnap them.
This sounds remarkably familiar, with the exception of kidnapping, to Portland, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Black Lives Matter. I'm sorry, I digress, but it sounds very similar.
Well, you know, the thing that is similar is the way they're organized. Not necessarily the terrorizing protesters, because it's not like conservatives are protesting and then they're coming to arm to kidnap them. They're just protesting themselves and destroying the country themselves. But the big similarity is that these groups are organized nationally. Don't think that the groups in Portland are not organized nationally when you see that they travel from Portland to Washington, D.C., and they're arrested, and now it's an FBI investigation because of it. So it is very dangerous, because these are violent people. They destroy, my aunt, she lives in downtown Caracas. Every time there's rumors that there's going to be a movement against the regime, the colectivos come in their motorcycles to the street and they shoot at the buildings, risking killing someone. And she has bullets in her walls because of it. That it's insane. It's like living in a totalitarian dictatorship. That's what it is.
That's great. So Brett has just made a comment here, and I was just generalizing very quickly because I didn't want to get into Swearim DJ's comment, but I'm going to get to Swearim DJ's comment. But Brett says that capitalism has been practiced in the Dominican Republic to a certain degree. That's true, and it's worked for them, and they're a well-off country in Latin America. Yeah, but I look at them as a Caribbean basin country. It is Latin America, that's true, but I'm thinking of South America when I think of Latin America. Chile is not the only country that's had success. There have been other countries. Costa Rica has been largely successful with largely a free market economy, but not entirely. But by and large, most Latin American countries have never genuinely experienced free market capitalism. There's always been some state intrusion and usually some sort of dictator or oligarchy that's been ruling almost every country in Latin America throughout its history. Is that a reasonably fair statement, or did I miss something?
I think it is. Well, Panama, I think, has been pretty successful too.
Panama. Okay, Panama.
I actually visited Panama in 2015 before we left Venezuela. We were thinking about leaving Venezuela to go to Panama.
Okay.
Because they have easy immigration laws for us to go there. And at the same time, when I went, it was so surprising, because it was like being in Venezuela, because the people spoke a very similar accent. They look similar too, but there was no socialism. So there was everything in the supermarket, the American brands. There was a Walmart, Starbucks, nice buildings, low crime. It was good. It was the place that Venezuela should be like.
You say there was a Starbucks there. You say a Starbucks?
Yeah. Hey, a big part of how I measure prosperity is whether a country has a Starbucks. But there's a reason Chile has one and other places do not. But Venezuela only had a brief period of very free markets, and that was between the late 1940s and the early 1960s. But that was, again, as you said, under a right-wing dictator.
Yeah.
And once the dictatorship fell, democratic governments increased state power until they destroyed the country completely. And that's why Chavez got elected. That's something people need to know. Socialism in Venezuela did not start with Hugo Chavez. Oil was nationalized in 1976, more than 20 years before Chavez came into power. And once oil was nationalized in the 70s, the government grew so large, and they still did not have enough money to cover all their welfare spending. Inflation increased. They put price controls just like Chavez did later. The economy was in shambles. And the difference was that they reformed, right? In the 90s, they reformed. private investment came back to the oil industry. And that's during that period is that my parents were able to open their gas station, which is what we live off. And we were able to charge prices freely. It was a normal business. Once Chavez came to power, he capped the prices of gasoline again, freezing them for over 2 decades. And that meant that our business, as inflation increased, could not make any money. So we started living off government subsidies. I had to make lines then for food for hours. I was denied food because I had already went over my quota. It's insane. You have to put your fingerprint in the supermarket. That's how government controlled this.
Well, it's interesting, but we should note that it's not just totalitarian states and socialist states that impose price controls. In fact, here in the United States, we famously had price controls during the Second World War. One could make the argument that it was necessary to keep inflation under control so that resources could be diverted to the war effort. I'm not supporting it. I'm just saying that it did happen. We had a price control board that did that. And then we even controlled the price of fuel. It wasn't free market in this country for a long time, which is insane. I remember very vividly my stepfather, who was a truck driver, long distance truck driver for Owens Corning, Owens, Illinois, the long distance truck company back in the 70s, belly aching about the fact that the Reagan took the price controls off of fuel. He thought that was wrong. And even as a young guy, I shook my head. I'm like, why should the government determine what something costs? Who are they? What make them the experts? And they don't produce it. They don't do the inputs. Even as a 16-year-old, I figured that out. So I don't really understand why people think that government controlling price. In Africa, that's the norm. You have governments set the price for petrol. So basically, businesses have to make money by overcharging you for beef jerky, biltong, or a can of Coca-Cola just to break even or survive and pay their workers when they can't make any money, or they actually lose money on every liter of petrol that they sell you. It's absolute stupidity. The market should dictate.
It is. And those price controls that today we have had price controls. In fact, Chris, the whole reason we didn't have toilet paper during the COVID-19 crisis, when people got nervous and went to buy more toilet paper, is because states have something called anti-price gouging laws. Mm-hmm. And this is a very difficult topic to persuade people on, because for some reason the public opinion is overwhelmingly in favor of these laws. However, these are the same socialist laws that Venezuela has, just that they're temporary. But that doesn't mean their effect is different. That just means their effect is temporary as well. And so that's why we didn't have toilet paper in the supermarket for a temporary period. And if we had just allowed toilet paper to increase a couple dollars more in price, all of these other people who were hoarding toilet paper wouldn't have done it. And so it's just common sense. All economists agree on this. We shouldn't have had price controls ever. There are different ways to help the poor. That is not the government telling businesses what to charge, right? And they're much less inefficient, and it helps the poor more. Price controls don't help the poor. They help the people who get to the supermarket first and get whatever is available.
Exactly. They get to clean things out because everybody. It's just kind of like the. I need to get to the super chats in a moment, Daniel. But before I do, because it is capitalism, we want to make sure that the free market reigns here. And so a couple people made some comments on super chat, and I'll get to those in a moment. But it's funny listening to people talk about these price controls and price supports, why they actually buy into this nonsense that it's good. But it's also like the minimum wage. That kind of irritates me as well. Because when you set a minimum wage, I understand the logic behind it, but when you set a minimum wage, let's say this or the basic income grant, this thing that Yang wanted to give to everybody in America. So you give everybody $10,000. Well, guess what? $10,000 isn't worth $10,000 anymore, because you just devalue the currency by giving everybody a baseline. So 10,000 less means nothing. It has no value. It quickly erodes, and that drives me nuts. I don't understand how people can be so moronic and stupid, but I do, because it's a power grab by leftists who want to look like they're helping while they increase their own power.
Look, Chris, in Venezuela, I can't count how many times they increased the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks, Maduro would come on TV, or Chavez would do it, and 50% increase starting on Monday. And because businesses were also banned from firing their workers, that was also illegal. That's how you couldn't fire anyone. That's how bad. If you hire them, forever until they die or quit. There was no reason you could fire a worker. Bless you.
Thank you.
And that meant that businesses just passed through all the cost of the increased minimum wage to the customer.
Exactly.
We saw they increased it so much that everybody was making the same amount.
Exactly. There's no differentiation. So instead of
The economy
raising,
minister went on TV to say, he went on the government TV to say that doctors and garbage collectors should make the same amount of money. Even the TV host in the government-owned Maduro regime-controlled TV station was shocked, and she asked him, and you can look this up on YouTube, the whole clip is recorded for history. Don't you think there's some education and experience considerations there to pay them differently? And the minister responded, and I'm not sure if he actually believed it because he seemed pretty stupid. He said, no, the garbage collector protects health and the doctor fixes health. They do the same. That's what he said.
well, I guess I should make the same amount of money too because I wash my hands vigorously. So I'm protecting health as well. Yes. Well, there you go.
Right.
So let me, as I said, in the interest of capitalism here, we've got some super chats, and I want to get to those from my viewers on the channel. Since my viewers are in the mood to super chat, I definitely don't want to miss this. But Brett Sessoms gave a super chat. He said, the African National Congress in South Africa supports Nicolas Maduro. In fact, they do. That's a true statement.
Yeah. Maduro has relationships with many governments around the world, and South Africa is one of them. It's not the main ally at all. It's Iran, it's Cuba, especially China, Russia, but South Africa is one of them, unfortunately, and it's something they have to fix because South Africa can be a much more prosperous country if they just stop trying to take over land or overtaxing and overregulating businesses.
Now, there's another super chat here from Drian Fonsail, who's in South Africa. And Drian is one of these people that's looking at exiting South Africa because it's becoming quite desperate. So I think he can relate to your situation. Not quite as desperate yet as it was for folks in Venezuela. But he says, interesting chat, Chris. Please ask your guest his opinion on South Africa and the push for socialism by the ANC and the economic freedom fighters. I don't know that you're a subject matter expert on South Africa, but you certainly, I think we could argue, are a subject matter expert on the push for socialism. So what do you think about that in the context of South Africa?
Well, I've seen speeches of some of the members of Congress of the Economic Freedom Fighters, which I hate their political party's name because economic freedom is capitalism. It's not social, and they have sequestered our phrase. So I am very mad about that. When I first read, because I always look up about different countries, and when I first read there was a party called Economic Freedom Fighters, I'm like, oh, wow, these are my people. And then it's like, oh, no, these are not my people. These are communists. And they should just be called the Communist Party of South Africa. But I think it's very, very dangerous people. They are just like Hugo Chavez. They're just like Maduro. And if they ever have the opportunity to do it, they're going to turn South Africa into Venezuela. Just by them speaking, this is the same speech, and people are going to be naive, to whomever asked the question in South Africa. In Venezuela, people said, we will never become like Cuba, when they were justifying voting for Chavez. We're not an island. Come on, we have oil. We are the richest country here. We will never become a socialist country like that. Chavez will not take all the businesses. Guess what? That's exactly what happened. And all the people who said that now say we were rich, but we didn't know it.
Yep, that's true. It's interesting because the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the man who styles himself as the so-called commander-in-chief of the EFF, one Julius Malema, whom we call Juju, or the Inconvenient Youth, got himself kicked out of the African National Congress because of his comments against the party leader who was the president at the time, Jacob Zuma, and then rapidly formed the Economic Freedom Fighters with some mysterious big capital behind the party. They have risen over the past couple elections up to about 10% of the electorate. I think, honestly, that the cap is 15%. They're not going to go beyond that. But Juju famously went to Venezuela and I think hung out with Chavez before he took the dirt nap.
This is the same story of the political party Podemos in Spain. Are you familiar with them?
I'm not familiar with them. The reason I mention this is because Fernando Pito mentioned, I was going to bring it up anyway, but Fernando Pito in the chat mentioned that, Malema had gone to Venezuela. I remember that very well. But no, what's the story with Spain?
Look, what happened? Spain now, the vice president of Spain is a man called Pablo Iglesias. He was a personal advisor of Hugo Chavez, got paid millions of euros, and went on after he advised together with his team of communists. While Chavez was killing people, while Chavez was destroying our country, he was advising him on how to do it. Went back to Spain, founded a political party, and now is the vice president of Spain. This is a man who wears the shirt of Hugo Chavez, says that he's his personal hero, and that Spain should be like Venezuela. And this is the man whom the traditional center-left moderate party, which are not really moderate at all, could be like the ANC in South Africa in the future, the PSOE, the traditional socialist party. Now they are together. Wow. Why? Because they need each other. The numbers work, and so they're going to govern together if it needs to be. People think that regimes like Maduro's are going to stay in Venezuela. They're just going to get rich with the oil there, and that's all they're going to do. No, these people have a world domination agenda. These people want to, under the crown of the jewel they want to control is the United States of America.
Ah, indeed.
Because this is the freest, most powerful country in the world. Once the United States of America stops being that light in the world, they have free reign to do whatever they want anywhere else. But they also want to control smaller places. That's why they control Spain. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Perhaps they funded the economic freedom fighters, and we just don't have the evidence yet. We just have the evidence for Spain. We know they also paid money to the leftist party in Greece, Syriza. They ended up winning the elections, and then they lost, thankfully. But these people who meet with Chavez and then they return to their countries, that's not a coincidence.
No, it's not. What always strikes me as quite odd, too, is that, of course, I've lived all over the world, Daniel. I mean, I've lived in Europe and the Middle East and Africa, the United States, never in Latin America, but lived in those other places. And I've lived in about 16, 20 different countries. Actually lived, not visited. I visited about 100 countries. But the thing is, it always strikes me is that the people I meet who are usually the most vile and rude and disrespectful and inconsiderate of others are not conservatives or capitalists, but they're leftists. They're the ones, like, remember a year or so ago, they started this campaign to out Senator Lindsey Graham as a homosexual. That was the left that did that.
Yes.
There was nobody on the right. No devout Christians were trying to expose what his sexuality was. They do this stuff all the time, and they pretend that they're the kinder, gentler, friendlier people, and they're the most vile and disrespectful people that I've ever met. These people on the left, it's just a tactic to hoodwink people.
Yeah, it's so sad what they have been doing for decades in the United States. People think that it's just with Trump, but the whole reason it's a joke, everything they say against Trump, it's because they have said the same thing against every Republican presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan or before. Ronald Reagan, they told him he was a racist. George Bush was a racist. George Bush's son was a racist. Romney was a racist. Mitt Romney. And now they love Mitt Romney because they're hypocrites. They never believed he was a racist. They were just liars.
Of course not.
And it's sad because they're smearing a man's character against half of the population. You can disagree with someone, but you don't have to lie about them.
Exactly. If your arguments have strength, then you don't need to denigrate someone. You don't need to attack them personally. You just simply point out the failings of their logic. That's all. And that's it's really frustrating. So somebody here, let me get this very quickly. This is a good one. So this was Shack Dweller said that the commander-in-chief, that the so-style commander-in-chief, Julius Malema, is actually not the commander-in-chief. He's the chipmunk in charge. That was funny. Anyway, but Brett Sessoms gave a nice super chat here, and he says, has your guest ever been to the Dominican Republic? Brett studied abroad there. Chavez and Maduro were not too popular from what he saw in the Dominican Republic. And not surprising.
I have never been to the Dominican Republic. I just know that they had recently a presidential election, and a new man won who supposedly is going to be better than the previous government of Danilo or Medina, who was a pretty leftist, who was somewhat allied with Maduro. But the new guy supposedly is not, but I can't say much more than that.
Okay, well, but thanks for that. I too have never been to the Dominican Republic, but as I recall, it's on the other side of the island, Hispaniola, isn't it, with Haiti on the other side? And I've seen the satellite imagery because you see the denuded side of the island that the Haitians own, and then the lush, verdant, green, beautiful, developed side. and nature side that exists on the Dominican Republic. It's a stark contrast in showing the difference between systems of governance. People can always play this race, religion, ethnicity, language. Yeah, that's all nonsense. I mean, it all plays a role, but all you have to do is look at that island and you can see the clear distinction between one type of governance and another type of governance. Now, not to say the Dominican Republic is a wealthy, prosperous country, but it's certainly not the destitute, dire place.
It's a normal country. It's a normal country. They are a world tourist destination.
Yep.
Venezuelans, before we were poor, high schools, when the high school graduation came, all the high school groups went to Dominican Republic for a vacation. That was the tradition, but not anymore in the last decade.
No, it's true. It's interesting because in Africa, in West Africa, Liberia, before its civil war, was the destination for diplomats and business people from all over West Africa who wanted to go somewhere on holiday. They fly to Monrovia. They go to Robertsport where there's surfing and the hotels. There was a golf course at the Voice of America site. It was like an odd number of holes, 12 holes, but it was a golf course. And all these expats would go there. It had 13 commercial power stations throughout the country. Now, true, it was largely underdeveloped and a lot of people lived in poverty, but it was a functioning country. And then the 13-year Civil War comes along and it just falls apart. Now, of course, there was one that predated that 1980. But the point is that when I arrived in Liberia, there were no commercial power stations. The only reliable electricity was that provided by the American Embassy for its compound, because we ran through two 60 kW generators, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But no one else had reliable power. The cell phone networks were spotty. There was no food in the shops for a lot of people. It was pretty desperate. And we saw the impact of poor leadership and poor governance. It's really sad when you see that stuff.
Yeah, it's always about governance. It's never, it's never about culture. It's never about anything like that. Even when people say, and this is people when they don't really know about the policies, the Nordic countries are homogeneous. No, it's not about being homogeneous or not.
No.
They're just not socialist. They have less regulation than the United States.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Corporations like the United States. They tax individuals who can't move because they're lower income.
Thank you. No, it's sorry to interrupt you, but it's driving me nuts every time I hear the left run around and go, or Bernie Sanders, we'll use the Scandinavian model. Well, first off, there's multiple Scandinavian countries. Second, you're distorting reality there. Norway is awash in natural resources with oil from the North Sea that's made them incredibly wealthy. And then when you look at Sweden, if you go back to the 1990s, you'll see that in the early 1990s that most Scandinavian economies nearly collapsed, especially Sweden. The government had to take over 7 of the 10 banks because they were on the verge of collapse. They lowered the tax rate so much so now that Scandinavians on average pay less in taxes than Americans do. And most people don't know that. They really don't know that. That's the truth. They used to have a top 90% tax rate that was lowered. They lowered now the value-added tax is high. It's like 24% or something like that.
No, the poor pay more taxes in Scandinavia than they do in the United States, for sure.
Yep.
Here half of the population, or 40%, do not pay income tax on net. They only pay payroll taxes. In Scandinavia, everybody pays this. And it's like at least 20% of your income, and then you pay a 20% in sales tax, which is a VAT. And so the difference is that in their system, they take away money from you to give back to you again.
Right.
I disagree with that. I think that if you're going to take money away from someone to give it back to them, just let it, keep it. It's a lot simpler. But in America's system, the system is much more redistributive. The tax code in the United States takes away more from the rich to give to the poor than the tax code in Norway or in Sweden or in Denmark.
Yep.
This is according to a tax foundation. This is not just me. There are measures to know the how redistributive and how progressive a tax code is. America's is one of the most progressive in the developed world.
It's a vile system, and I detest it. And this comes from a person who grew up in abject poverty. When I was a kid, we didn't have electricity for a period of time. I used an outhouse to go to the toilet. I fetched water from a cistern for cooking and for eating, collected eggs and milked cows by hand. So I've seen that side of things. Now, that's not poverty in Bangladesh or even in Venezuela today, but it was poverty nonetheless. And I did go to university, but on full federal assistance, full student loans, and I worked and all that. So I've seen on both sides, and I've done okay in life, and I'm not exactly eating cat food out of a can these days in retirement. But my point is that I find it vile and disgusting, the system we have in America here, because 1% of the tax base pays 25% of the total tax bill at the federal level. And that's just the federal level. If you look at New York State and places like that, it's even higher. They take from the people who... And so what you do is you punish thrift, you punish achievement. You punish entrepreneurialism. You punish all the things that made America successful and rose us to the top, not simply an accident of history. This was a consequence of design. And you punish all this, and for what? To appease people so they'll vote for you so you can have a nice life in San Francisco and Washington, jetting back and forth and telling people to attend Chinese fairs when they have coronavirus? I'm sorry, was I talking about Nancy Pelosi?
Look, I think that the big difference is that conservatives, we want a tax system that collects revenue, as much revenue as efficiently as possible, and affecting economic growth as least as possible. That's our goal. Mm-hmm. But for the left today, the goal of the tax system is not to collect revenue to fund spending or do things like that. The goal is to punish, because they hate the rich. They just want to take away from the rich, even if they don't collect a dime, because their goal is for them not to be billionaires. That's what Bernie Sanders himself and many other politicians have said. They think that it's immoral to be a billionaire. I think that thanks to Amazon, I have the bookshelf I have just behind me. I have books, I have things I purchased, and Jeff Bezos deserves all his wealth, which he got very honestly and working. He did not steal from it. He's not a regime crony of a foreign government, killing people or having a monopoly. None of that is true. It's a free market corporation that became global successfully from somebody who thought big decades ago, and he deserves it. And if we don't allow that to happen, we're not going to get more Amazons. We're not going to get more life-saving drugs. And it's bad for us. It's not just because it's unfair with those people, which it is. It's because it's bad for us. It's unfair with us.
What's frustrating with this, though, Daniel, and let me get your take on this, it's very disturbing to me, is that you see a lot of people who've been incredibly successful and profited from a system. I make the argument the U.S. is not entirely a free market system. We have too much state sponsored.
It is not.
We have Fannie Mae, we have Freddie Mac, we have all these constraints, we have sugar subsidies. That stuff needs to go. But because I'm definitely an Adam Smith, David Ricardo free market economist, or capitalist, I should say. But what's frustrating is we see a lot of these people who make it big, like Bezos or like Warren Buffett and a whole list of others, and Bill Gates, and then they spew this leftist socialist nonsense once they've got theirs. To me, it always seems as if they're just trying to protect the turf that they now have against competition. That always, because you see companies get big and they want to make use the government as a tool to prevent further competition so they can stay large. I mean, in the case of Buffett, I found it vile and disgusting and amateurish, childish when he said that it's unfair that my secretary pays more in taxes than I do. Excuse me, she may pay a higher tax rate because you had largely dividend income, which is taxed at a lower rate. And there's a reason why it's taxed at a lower rate, so that people invest in corporations so they can grow and create new jobs, and people pay lower taxes on dividends than they do on ordinary income, because they're two different types of income. So to say that she pays more in taxes than you when you made $16 billion in your pocket last year and she made $200,000 is just a lie. And to see people who've been so wealthy and so fantastically successful like that lie and distort the system for whatever purpose, it's very disturbing. I mean, is this a trend that you've seen, or is it something that you've noticed?
Well, first, it's false that investors pay a lower tax rate at all, and this false because dividends themselves are taxed less than regular wage income. Mm-hmm. But before you get the dividend, the corporation pays a corporate tax before it.
That's right.
So
it's taxed twice.
The dividend tax is actually double taxation.
Yep.
So we're talking about corporate and then dividends, and then the effective tax rate is over 40% for all investors. Yeah. While his secretary, even if she makes a lot of money, which I'm sure he pays her well, how much will she pay? 20% tops if she's making what, 100K, yep. 80K. That is if she's a very well-paid secretary, which I imagine she is.
I'm sure she is.
And good for her, right? She deserves it. But I think that the big problem with rich people who support leftists, well, I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. Some of them might be doing it because they want to protect their competition. So they're never the Bernie Sanders type of leftist. They're more the moderate ones who just want more regulation because they know they can withstand the regulation, but the smaller competitors cannot. But some of them, I think, are just fallen into the trap of feeling guilty for being rich. Some of them might have come from humble backgrounds like Buffett himself, and they think that being a good person is supporting a party that is promising all these free things for people who are lower resources, instead of supporting a party that is promising opportunities so more poor people can become like Warren Buffett, which is what we need. We don't need, Warren Buffett did not become a millionaire by getting food stamps. Warren Buffett became a millionaire by investing. Let's teach kids how to invest in school. Let's do things like that.
Well, it's actually, Daniel, you've hit on something very quickly there that I think is very important, and this kind of irritates me. Now, I'm self-taught when it comes to finances and investing, and I've done reasonably well over the years. But it takes some personal discipline, even when you only have a few dollars in your pocket, to save a few pennies and get in that habit of saving and investing. But what bothers me is that we are a financially illiterate nation. By and large, people have absolutely no idea how they make money, how you invest, how you grow money. Most people, I'm saying. And I think this is a societal failure. We pay for public schools. I pay a fortune in property taxes, far more than I should pay. I know people that live 2 counties away and they pay 1/10 of what I pay in property tax. And I don't live in a place that's like, with skyscrapers around me. So I would like to see some return on investment in our public schools, and I think that financial literacy should be taught in school. Kids should learn how to balance a checkbook, what a credit card is, what the obligations are. When you're paying 11% interest, realize that you're doubling what you pay in just 6 years. You're doubling it, paying that twice as much back by buying that blouse and not paying it off. And also teach them about mutual funds and bonds and about the marketplace, and teach them about the M1, the M2, the M3 types of money that are out there. These are not complicated things to teach, but I think we have a responsibility as a society to inculcate that information into the youth, and we're failing abjectly. Would you agree or disagree with that thought?
I think that we need to get more financial literacy. The US is definitely not the worst country in the world for financial literacy. No. Compared to underdeveloped countries, we are light years ahead. But if you were to go to Venezuela or any country in Africa, I'm sure, and you were to ask about mutual funds, probably most people, or 90%, wouldn't have no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think that wealth brings about more knowledge as well. And because the American people have the privilege, because that's a true privilege of living in this country, they are exposed to these things, which other people are not. I think that we can do better. I think the big problem is the public schools will never do as well as we want. We need school choice, right? Like other countries do have school choice, so that parents can send their kids to the best school possible, no matter where it is. And that's going to benefit especially poor people and minorities, who are the ones who need this the most. We need a tax system that doesn't punish success. We need to stop over licensing professions. The United States is one of the few countries where 1 in 4 professions now requires a license from the government to perform. And that's bad for the specific kind of people that are losing out in our economy, who are people who are born into lower income families, people who live in bad neighborhoods where they can't go to good schools. And these people are especially Black, Hispanic, lower income individuals in this country, who are the ones who the Democrats and the socialists say that their system is going to help, but their system has failed them. These people need support in the form of more economic freedom. We all need it. We are all going to benefit, but they're going to benefit the most from it. And they should, because they're the most disadvantaged.
No, absolutely. I can only agree with what you had to say. I was going to say I can't disagree more, but no, I cannot agree more. That's spot on. Listen, folks, you're listening to Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here on YouTube. I'm Chris in Central Pennsylvania. My special guest, I'm supposing he's in New York City right now, based on the fact he's going to Columbia. Is that a fair statement, or are you somewhere else right now?
I'm in Kentucky. Classes are online.
Oh, sorry. It's the age of COVID, so he's in Kentucky.
Hey, right. I'm happy. I'm saving money by living in Kentucky, to be honest, and I'm pretty sure my quality of life in the short term, given what's going on in Kentucky, more things are open. It's going to be better in Lexington than in New York City.
And actually, postgraduate studies, if it's done properly and the student has the right attitude, because I've done both resident and distance education, distance learning for my 3 master's programs. is one area that actually can function. Unlike primary school or secondary school, you can successfully achieve the right outcomes with distance, particularly working on dissertation. So yeah, in your case that works. But yeah, given New York City and Kentucky, I think I'd want to be in Kentucky too. So I can't dispute that. But folks, my special feature guest today is Daniel DiMartino. He's a Venezuelan freedom activist, an economist, a speaker and commentator and writer as well. And we're talking about a whole host of things. We've touched on Venezuela. We've got kind of away from it talking about socialism in general, which was kind of the idea here. But I think Brett Sessom mentioned earlier that the United States has the second highest corporate tax in the world. Well, that's courtesy of Donald Trump. We had the highest corporate tax rate in the world, but Donald Trump lowered it and the leftists lost their minds. And suddenly we achieved the unachievable, the exalted one himself, the Saint Barry Obama told us that we would never achieve beyond 2% GDP growth. I mean, what kind of, you know what they're doing now, Daniel? Now they're like, well, GDP is a poor measure of the health of a country. And we couldn't convince you with the adjusted, the dollar adjusted purchasing power parity nonsense. So since that's failed to achieve changing people's mindsets in GDP for 30 years, now we're going to tell you that we have to include how people feel about each other, how transgender bathrooms work, and work that into the equation and come up with a variable to shows the true health of a country so that we all know that China is the healthiest, wealthiest, and wisest country in the world. Can you believe this nonsense?
Look, if something was good about the tax reform of 2017 was the corporate tax rate cut, and something that hasn't been made permanent but should be made permanent, which is the expensing of equipment. Today, a corporation, if they purchase, let's say, a computer for the worker, they can, thanks to the tax reform, just write that off their taxes. And, the computer is going to increase their income in the future, so they're going to pay taxes on that additional income, and that's good. Before tax reform, you could only expense half of the cost of the computer, next year, part of the cost, the following year, part of the cost. And because of inflation, that value was never added up to the initial cost because they didn't adjust it for inflation. Now you can just write it off the same year you purchase it, and there's no worrying about inflation because next year you just won't write off anything. That's great, and that incentivizes corporations to purchase more things to make their workers more productive. And that means the workers make more money themselves, because if something we know in economics is that wages are driven by productivity. And if workers have access to more capital, to more trucks, more irrigation systems in agriculture, more things, they're going to produce more and they're going to be paid more because there's competition between businesses. And that's exactly what happened. We saw record wage growth. We saw record GDP growth. We saw record low unemployment. And that's going to continue. This tax reform this doesn't mean that we're going to grow at very high rates forever, but the lower corporate tax is going to increase our GDP forever. And we're going to be in a higher trajectory thanks to that. Other things were not as good. In the individual tax cuts, even though I'm for lower taxes, we probably needed to lower spending before lowering our tax revenue like that, especially when we know that the individual tax cuts are not really going to increase economic growth meaningfully, and they costed much more than the corporate tax cuts. But I guess it's just politically non-palatable, I don't know how to pronounce it, in this country to cut taxes on businesses and not on individuals, I guess. But it's what works.
Well, Daniel, my plan was to run for president in 2000. I was going to walk around the country. This is before I ever decided to make the military career. I decided as a young man in high school that in 2000 I would run for president. I would be old enough to run for president. I'd walk the country. I would not win, but I would meet a lot of people, learn a lot about the country and our society. And I probably would be a write-in candidate at most ballots. And then I have a platform, and I've stuck to it to these days. I would eliminate the federal corporate income tax entirely. There's no reason for it whatsoever. I don't know the current figure now and before Trump cut it, but I know that a decade ago when I was talking about this, out of a nearly $4 trillion federal budget, only $263 billion a year or so came from corporate taxes. Over $1 trillion plus came from personal income taxes. So eliminating the corporate income tax would have been a massive boost. I would make it zero. And people say, well, you're crazy. You're in favor of big business. No, I'm in favor of workers and prosperity, because why are we taxing corporations on the income and then taxing individuals on the income they make off of working for those corporations and then charging them taxes on when they purchase things? We're just impoverishing people and turning them into serfs. And my point is that it would make us instantly the most competitive country in the world because of our infrastructure, because of our data networks, because of our telecommunications, because of our highways, our rails, our ports, our airlines, all of that, plus the high productivity of American workers. You eliminate corporate tax, and then every country in the world will be scrambling to catch up to America. And the impact globally will be phenomenal for the countries that follow suit. And there'll be lots of robust growth. You talk about we won't have these high rates forever. That may be true, but I think a normal rate of growth would always be between 3 and 3.5% for a country that's improving and growing and developing new technologies like the United States.
Just look at Ireland. 20 years ago, Ireland was pretty poor, and they lowered their corporate tax. Now it's one of the lowest in the whole world. It's only 12%. All the companies moved to Ireland to pay the lower tax.
Yep. And
now they have Amazon. Now they have all the headquarters of all the European companies. American companies are leaving to Ireland because they pay lower taxes. They know that corporations move. People have a hard time moving, where corporations can just buy a new building and hire a few people, and that's their new HQ. Burger King moved to Canada. This is a traditional American company. They moved to Canada because in Canada, corporations pay lower taxes than in America. Socialist Canada, right? Because they're not really socialist. They just have some welfare programs. We can agree or disagree about them. I disagree with them, but they do other things very smartly.
Oh, absolutely.
So if America did that, we would be so rich. No company would ever move again to another country. They would move to the United States, and we would just need to tax people as they get paid by the company at the same rate. Rather than have a lower tax for dividends, we can just tax everything as regular income, and it would increase our tax base, because more people would come here and work. Corporations would hire more workers. They would bring more workers from abroad, experts and executives, and they would pay taxes here. It would be really great. I wish it was more politically possible.
No, I agree with you entirely. But Daniel, I think that we've been entirely unfair with the socialists here, and maybe we should take a moment and pause, because you and I could be wrong. I mean, just maybe this time they'll get it right. I mean, all the past failures are just there was a wrong approach. We just need a different hand on the till. I think President Kamala Harris in a President Biden in a Biden-Harris administration would be the right hand behind the tiller. She's so well known for her compassion for youth, what with never prosecuting a single Catholic Church child molester in San Francisco as 8 years as district attorney, or as the Attorney General of California. I think she's the right hand to put on the tiller, because socialism is the answer. You just got to have the right people in charge, and we've never gotten there. So maybe Bernie Sanders could be our finance minister here. We'll change the titles from secretary to finance minister. How's that sound?
You know who they're considering for a cabinet position? A representative called Karen Bass.
Okay.
I don't remember which state she's from, but this is a woman who, when she was graduating high school, she went to be trained in Cuba. And she's a member of the House of Representatives, and she's a communist. And she was one of the possible VP picks, because Biden wanted to pick a black woman. She was a black woman. She was a member of Congress. Very successful career, good for her. But she's a communist. She's unqualified. Anybody who's a communist is unqualified. They should never be president. Anybody who traveled to Cuba for any training should never be in American government. And so these are the people who are running the Democratic Party, and it's very worrisome. I'm also worried that there is a perception that because Biden is a moderate, because Biden himself is a moderate. The problem is that this man is unfortunately senile, and he's not going to be in charge of the U.S. government. And I say this with pain for him, because I've seen his videos of how he spoke just in 2008 when he was elected vice president. This man was a machine. He could debate. He would have been a tough challenger for Trump if he had been the Joe Biden of 2008. But 12 years later, he's not the same, unfortunately for him. And so there's this perception that he's a moderate, and if he loses this election, I'm afraid that the Democrats will turn just even harder to the left in 2024.
It is quite frightening. And what's more frightening to me is we see people who defraud our immigration system with fraudulent political asylum claims come here, settle in Minnesota, and then with their virulent anti-Semitic comments, get elected to Congress, and then are abusive, vile, disgusting, and say the most horrific things about this country. If you don't like it, piss off and go back to Somalia.
He's one of the worst. Ilhan Omar is one of the worst of all.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like it, piss off and go back to Somalia. Don't come here. This is the secret sauce recipe for American success. There are many things to our success, but one of the things I argue, and let me go with this for a second, Daniel, and then I'll get your feedback on this and your thoughts because you've immigrated here. But one of the success of this country is that for decades, for centuries, when immigrants came to this country, they aspired to do something different than where they came from. Because for whatever reason, whether it was religious persecution or it was lack of economic opportunity or being a serf in a foreign country or being denied because of a monarchy or an oppressive state, people came to America for hope. They came to America for a change. And you came to this country and you were not tied to the sins of your parents or the status of your parents. None of that applied anymore. You could become whoever you wanted. And in this country, you can fail, and famously, you can reinvent yourself and come back and succeed. Most entrepreneurs have failed multiple times before they latch on to that one thing that makes them successful. I mean, look at, the guy from the Dallas Mavericks, the annoying guy with the shark show. I can't think of his name right now. But,
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Mark Cuban, who I find the most annoying American on the planet. You remember those commercials, Dos Equis? The most interesting man in the world. I find Mark Cuban to be the most annoying American on the planet. But anyway,
really, I actually like his show, and I think
I like Shark Tank. I do like Shark Tank, but he's arrogant, and he's also a leftist in his views. Some of the nonsense he says drives me nuts.
Yeah. He's not as leftist and everything. I don't know. I think that because I like Shark Tank a lot, I'm a little bit biased in favor of him.
Well, that might be the case. I actually like Shark Tank too. It's actually an entertaining show, and actually has profited. There's some good capitalism going on there for folks. But anyway, I don't want to beat up on Mark Cuban, but for decades, for centuries, you could come here and you change. Now, what you get. The left started this nonsense years ago. Oh, well, this is oppressive. You don't let people speak in their native language. No, anybody can speak any language they want. All I got to do is point to the historic old Hispanic Spanish families of New Mexico, of South Texas, of California, who've been here for over 400 years in many cases, and they still speak Spanish as a first language. They're by and large still Roman Catholics. They practice cotillion for their daughters. They have their culture. They have their language, which is distinct, and they are Americans first and foremost. Then you look at the Amish and the Mennonites. Most of the Amish still speak German as a first language, but they pay taxes. They contribute to the economy. They are Americans first and foremost. They don't serve in the military, but most people don't these days. It's voluntary. But even under the draft, they had exemptions like Seventh-day Adventists. But the point is that these are groups that have retained their cultural distinctiveness, yet they've become part of the fabric of America. They've contributed. They learned the language. They adopted to the social mores, values, and norms of this country. And now we have people coming here, and they're trying to divide this country, not the people necessarily coming, but the political left, divide us based on ethnicity, race, language. And we see it with the interplay between Spanish and English. I speak 6 languages. 3 of them are African languages. And
wow.
Yeah, no. Well, that's why I like that.
Which languages do you speak?
So English, French, German, Afrikaans, Setswana, and Swahili to varying degrees of proficiency.
Wow.
Yeah, so
it's amazing. Wow.
Well, no, it's just a poor white boy grew up in Appalachia, so there you go. But also lived in a housing project where there were 300 families. 3 of them were white. Three. Sorry, I'm missing a finger. 3 were white, and the rest were black. So I lived in a housing project in Buffalo, New York, and I went to a public school where all my classmates were Puerto Rican. They wouldn't speak to me because I didn't speak Spanish. I mean, I'm sorry. I just moved here 2 weeks ago. You expect me to speak this language? It isn't from my country. Anyway, but this thing. So when I was in Maryland back 20 years ago, working at the National Security Agency, the state of Maryland started producing documents in Spanish and in English. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Why are we doing this? Less than 2% of the state of Maryland, the population, spoke Spanish to any degree of proficiency, including illegal aliens who were working on housing projects in Maryland. Less than 2%. Yet nearly 4% of the state spoke Russian or Ukrainian, which is essentially the same language in many respects. So why aren't the documents in Russian or Ukrainian? Why are they in Spanish? So this is an intentional effort on my part. But so I'm sorry, it was kind of a long rant there. But what I was getting at is that one of the secret success of this country is that immigrants come here, they accept the norms, the values, the laws of the country, and they bring their uniqueness, and it becomes part of the mosaic of our society. We have cotillion because of the old Spanish families in the Southwest. We have kindergarten because of Germans. We have excellent Indian food because of those from the subcontinent. We have fantastic music from Africans, most of whom came involuntarily, but it became part of our fabric. So what are your thoughts on immigration, if that's fair?
Yeah. Well, I think people like Ilhan Omar and everything, I wouldn't blame her for like coming here and doing things. She came here as a child. She didn't really experience anything in Somalia. She didn't learn any lesson from Somalia, let's be honest, because she never lived it. Yeah. If you come here and you're 3 years old, you've never lived it. You don't remember. And so she was brainwashed, like many kids in America are being brainwashed today about how America is guilty for everything that happens around the world, when you go and ask the people in those countries, they say, what the heck are you talking about? Here's nothing is to do with America. I love the United States and I want to move there. That's not what people think around the world. But that's what they make Americans believe.
Yep.
And that's in part because we have let schools be controlled by leftists, and in part because parents are not stepping up in their children's education. We're conservatives. We believe in personal responsibility. This is not just a matter of government policy that we have to take over the Department of Education and do this and do that. No, it starts in your home by you teaching your children what America is about and what's happening in the rest of the world. That's it. If all parents did that, we wouldn't even have to worry about what the government is doing in the schools, because you know that your kids are well educated in your home. Now, regarding immigration, look, it's very hard to come to the United States legally.
Yes.
I came here on a student visa initially, and that's how, I finished my education in Venezuela. I got a scholarship, full ride, and that's how I went to school in Indiana and then again in Colombia. So that's how it works. But there are about 1 million green cards that are given away every year in this country. 2/3 of them are if you're a direct family member of a U.S. citizen. So most people who come here because they're the sibling, parent, or child or spouse of an American citizen. If you don't have a family member in this country, it's very, very hard to come here. Now, which are the paths if you're not a family member?
You mean you mean legally come here?
Legally. Yes, legally. If you don't have a family member, you can come here based on a job, but they only give 140,000 of those a year. Only 14% of the immigrants this country admits are based on jobs. And these are overwhelmingly very high-skilled jobs for which you need a college education and a well college education. You need an employer willing to spend thousands and thousands of dollars and years in a process that they don't even have a guarantee of getting approved on. So it's very, very difficult. And then the rest of all the green cards are given 50,000 on a lottery, worldwide lottery, and as many as the president authorizes for refugees and then political asylees. More people come here as refugees and asylees than they come here because they come through a merit-based system. It's unfortunate. Countries like Canada, countries like Australia, they admit as a percent of their populations many more people based on their skills. In fact, Canada alone admits more immigrants based on jobs than the United States, and they have 1/10 of the population. And they have a very low unemployment. Their immigration system works very well. Immigrants adapt because the whole problem with how the system is, if everybody comes here based on family ties, is that there's really no effort to come here. You're just approved automatically. If there's no kind of, you need to learn as much English to come here. You need to finish high school or at least come here and finish high school before we give you your documents, things like that. The system needs to be more merit-based. And it's unfortunate that even though the president has said and has given many good ideas in the last few years about that, he really has not done anything about it. The last 6 months, in fact, the only thing the president has done with immigration is block the only merit-based programs there are, which are the job-based visas, with the excuse that unemployment is high. However, unemployment is not related to the jobs-based visas. All the economic studies show that these are people who create jobs, do not take jobs from Americans. It's just puzzling to me what's happening in this country with immigration, because the left is using it to divide the country. They want to make the lie that immigrants are going to vote for them, and so they're going to win forever if we admit more immigrants. But the truth is that immigrants vote for the left because the right is not doing anything about helping more people come here legally based on skills. The right is only believing what the left is telling them and saying we don't need more immigration. And so the immigrants are never going to vote for them. It's illogical. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy what's happening. Why do you think that immigrant groups like the Cubans, like the Venezuelans, by the way, there was a recent poll in Florida, Venezuelans in Florida, 2/3 are going to vote for President Trump in November. Why are they more conservative? Well, in big part, because they experience socialism themselves. So it's not like if you admit people from leftist countries, they're going to make the America leftist. No, people leave their country for a reason, and it's not because they like it. And many other people who come here into the United States from Mexico and Central America, they actually have the lowest rates of naturalization. They become permanent residents, but they don't want to become citizens because they come here for work and then they want to go back. And that's what we need to let them do. So I think the issue is much more complex than people think. We need to admit more people legally so that less people come illegally. And we need to do it based on merit and not just close off the borders completely, because this country was, at the end, everybody here is a descendant of immigrants one way or the other too. Including
the Native Americans. Yep.
Yep. Humans started in Africa, that's where the true human species started.
Everybody's a migrant. No, it's you're right. It is a very complex situation, and it plays out in many ways. So, for instance, you've talked about how people got the inverse. The HB1 visas tend to be in high-tech positions or medical fields and science and technology, and they generally create more jobs and add more to society than they take away. But that's been a hot-button issue for a number of years, the HB1 visas. By the converse, most of the illegal immigrants who come here, not most, but many of them, do take away and compete with lower skilled workers in this country and do have a detrimental impact, arguably in the agricultural sector and also in things like specialty trades. Like, for instance, I saw multiple housing projects in the early part of the 2000s with dozens and dozens of illegal immigrants who were working on them as carpenters, but not certified as carpenters, working as plumbers, but not certified as plumbers. Of course, that goes back to your argument, too many professions are overregulated, but some professions do need to be regulated. You don't need just anybody showing up and building a house it can't prove that they've done it before. But yeah, so it's complex. But on the flip side of this too is that while the argument you're making, Daniel, is that we should have more immigration for skilled workers, that's a fair argument, and I would agree with you on that. In fact, Canada gets a good reputation for its immigration, but they also apply that to asylum seekers. They take asylum seekers in Canada based on skills. They rate them based on skills, and if they don't rate high enough, you're not a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, an astronomer, and you don't speak English or French, then you're not going to do as well as someone who's just picking olives in Syria. You're not going to get in. The Economist praised Canada, but they were dishonest in their praise because they didn't tell the whole story about Canada. Now, when it comes to America, whatever people say about immigration, we have to admit this: 800 to 1,000 to 1 million people we naturalize every year. No country on the planet comes remotely close to letting 1 million people become team members on their team every year and hand them a passport every single year.
But that's generally because America has also the greatest population of any developed country. As a percent of the population, many countries actually admit more people legally than America. Australia, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, all of them admit more people legally because the populations are smaller, right? So we have to adjust based on that, not than the United States. Venezuela was actually a really great example in the 40s and 50s. My family actually came that way. In the 1950s, my grandparents immigrated to Venezuela from Italy and Spain when they were devastated by the Civil War, the World War II, and they were not having good governments at all. They were very poor. My grandparents didn't even finish high school. They immigrated to Venezuela at a time when Venezuela had 4 million people in their population. The population within 10 years, just because of immigration, increased by over 1 million, a 25% increase in just 10 years because of immigration. That is insane. That is like record breaking. And why was that able to happen? Well, at the same time, Venezuela did not have a high unemployment. It was good because Venezuela had a good economy. America can do the same. The difference is that it has to be in a way that it's orderly, right? You can't just, let everybody come and there's no vetting or there's no filter to come, right? There has to be a way. But the problem for so many people around the world is that there is just no line to get into. There is just no way to come here legally. And while that might not be a problem with countries in Asia or Africa, because there's no way they can come here legally, the people in Latin America are going to come here legally. And no matter what you do, people are going to come here and they're going to obtain tourist visas and they're going to overstay, and there's never going to be a perfect system. And the more they overstay, then the more national security risk they mean, right? Because they can't be tracked. They were never vetted. And that's why more legal immigration is good, not just for the economy, but for national security as well.
No, that's a good point. So here's a couple comments here from the chat. People are saying this guy's really smart. I assume they're talking about you, Daniel, and not me. But anyway.
Well, I'm not the one who knows 6 languages, but, and was a colonel and many other things. You are really, really great, Chris. I'm very impressed and really happy to get to know you.
Well, likewise, Daniel. I'm very impressed by you, and I'm grateful for your honesty and talking about these issues, because the left is very frustrating, because they'll lie till the cows come home just to distort the argument. It's nice to see someone who's young who gets it and is willing to share. So let me share this very quickly. This is from Erica. Now, just to let you know, Erica is Swiss-Belgian by ethnicity. Born in Africa, in Katanga in the Congo, and was there as a small child when the Katangan crisis, the Congo crisis, erupted in the early 1960s, and then was one of the last people to escape without being murdered by the people who were going rampaging there. They wound up in Rhodesia, I think, and then later in South Africa. She's quite an interesting person. She's really short, but she's kind of a cowboy. She was a dairy farmer. Anyway, so she says,
you know her?
Only from conversations and from YouTube, along with my other 8,000 subscribers. But she's also a member of the channel. She's fantastic. And she's a moderator on the channel. And so she tries to keep people from misbehaving on the channel, because sometimes we get trolls and start saying bad things. And so, but Erica says, Daniel talks sense, but I've passed my sell-by date. No country will take me. I had one offer, and that was to go to Tasmania. But I had one catch. I had to marry the guy. She packed her bags and ran home. So, no, it's what she's getting at. It's famously people over the age of 40 find it difficult to immigrate to other countries because countries go, well, we're not going to get much out of this person. There have been exceptions in the past because of family or other things, but also famously the West German government took any ethnic German speaker from Romania during the Ceausescu regime as part of the return to Germany, and they paid the Ceausescu regime 12,000 Deutschmarks per immigrant out of Romania. And of course, they sent mostly retirees, so they were no longer a burden on the Romanian retirement system, but they became a burden on the German system. But beyond that, it's really difficult for people beyond the age of 40 to immigrate anywhere. It's just, unless they're incredibly wealthy and incredibly well connected, it really is a challenge. So I feel bad for people who want to leave, particularly in South Africa right now, because I don't want people to leave South Africa, but a lot of people are quite desperate to leave the country because of the direction it's heading.
Yeah, that's something people need to know. Immigration is a bad thing for a country, and immigration is a good thing. You can't say that immigration is bad and immigration is bad too. No, they're opposites. One has to be good and the other has to be bad. And we know that brain drain is terrible for a country. And when people leave, it means things are bad in the country. Otherwise, people wouldn't leave. People don't make that decision lightly, right? People would rather stay where they are because it's the place they know and it's where they have their family and friends. I can bet that the 5 million of us who have left Venezuela would have been happy that Chavez had never been in power, and we would all still be with our friends and our families in Caracas and anywhere else. But that's just not possible. And if I was going to leave, I was going to come to a place where that was never going to happen again. And that's why I wanted to come to America. My parents emigrated as well. So for her that was asking the question, they left to Spain, and they were over 40. They left 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago already. It was like a year and a half after I came to America. And they were able to leave legally because my grandparents had come from Spain, right? And they have the citizenship. And so my dad has the Italian, my mom has the Spanish, so they were able to legally go there. But it's so difficult for people in Venezuela who don't have that luck, because I was just lucky, or they were just lucky, right, to be able to do that. But most Venezuelans don't have that luck. Some of them, well, there's a lot of people with double citizenship in the country because of all the immigration we have from Southern Europe, from the Middle East, and from Latin America. Millions of Colombo Venezuelans went back to Colombia. We have people, imagine how dire the situation is in Venezuela. We have Syrian Venezuelans go back to Syria. Syria, a country in civil war. I know people who went back to Syria.
Wow.
Venezuela had a big population of Syrians and Lebanese, and they were great. We had really great Lebanese and Syrian food because of it. But they're going back to a place where there's a civil war.
and millions of people have fled from.
It's insane. It's insane. It tells you how bad socialism is. It's worse than the Civil War. But on the matter of immigration, yes, the United States needs to be more open to admitting people who are not criminals, who, know English. And that's pretty much it. If they come here and work, and then if they come here and they become a burden or they commit a crime, then goodbye, get deported, get out of here. But if you're a well-meaning person, I don't see any reason why you can't come legally to the United States.
Now, listen, Daniel, I have to take exception to your comment. I'm going to tell you that I agree 100% with you.
There's a lot of people who disagree. There's a lot of people who disagree. There's people who think that immigration changes culture. And so that's going to, turn the United States. Look, the truth is that culture has changed a lot in the United States over the last 50 years itself. And it changes. And if we have to be worried about culture changing, we have to be worried about what the left is doing in the universities. It's not going to come because immigrants are different. Immigrants are actually better because they did not go through the brainwashing process of the left.
Well, let me give you an example of that very quickly, Daniel. So my experience is we've got about 3 million or so, maybe more, Black African immigrants who've come to America since about 1990, who've come to this country. Of those people who've come here, I've met so many Ghanaians and Nigerians who pretend to be Ghanaians, by the way, because the bad reputation Nigerians, you ask them, where are you from? From Ghana. I'm like, your surname.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. Like, your surname is not Ghanaian. That looks like an Igbo name, or something like that. Anyway, so or Yoruba name. It's not. It's definitely not a name from Ghana. Anyway, but you have a lot of Nigerians, a lot of Ghanaians, Liberians, others, and Africans from all the continent. And my personal experience of let's say I take 100 Africans that I've met in America, mostly on the East Coast, but also in other parts of the country, almost every one of them has succeeded. Whether they came on the visa lottery program or they came because they had skills, whatever, they've done something. They're managers of Lowe's or of Home Depot, and they run restaurants and they run businesses. They're coders, they're lawyers, they're doctors. They all succeed. And one thing that they don't have is historic legacy of racism and slavery in America, which in my personal view is something that limits the historic African American or Black community in America in many respects. Many people, instead of learning from history, they marinate in the misery of what happened before rather than learning the positive outcomes that came from ending that institution. And so they're held back by that worldview. Whereas Africans who come here don't have that baggage. I meet a lot of Black immigrants to the United States, and I talk to them, and they look at me like I don't. These guys in my neighborhood, I don't know what they're talking about. What are they? This isn't my experience. This is not the America I know. What are they talking about? Systemic racism and this and that and the other. That's not the life that I live here. And my point is that those immigrants came here and they're very different than the people here before. So culture does change. It's just the norm. If culture never changed, we'd all be living without the wheel. We wouldn't have agriculture. We'd be running around in bands, hunting saber-toothed cats. Well, we probably would have eliminated them by now, but we'd be hunting something and wearing loincloths. Culture does change.
Yeah. That's something also people need to know when they think about immigration. When we say that immigrants are so successful, even much more than the average native-born citizen, it is not because they're naturally better. They come from all places in the world. The difference is that immigrants self-select.
Yes.
The people who come here from other countries are not the average citizen of those countries, because you have to be driven, as you just said, to even leave your country. Look, I know so many people in Venezuela who are so talented, but they still refuse to leave the country. Yeah. And you think that if there's a place where people would be persuaded to leave, pack their bags and leave, is Venezuela. But some people are just too attached. And so the people who come are the people who are willing to leave everything behind. And to leave everything behind means you're more likely to be an entrepreneur. You're more likely to take risks. That means that you're going to create jobs in the United States. That means that you're going to create new products, innovate. And that's good for all Americans. And that's why Africans who come here are so successful, because not all Africans are willing to leave their country.
Exactly.
These are the people who are most driven of their countries, and they want to come in to America and contribute. Not letting them would be stupid.
No, it's a fair point. And like I said, I think we agree on the issue of immigration there. There's a couple comments, Daniel. Let me get these from the chat very quickly. And then I'll ask you a few questions more specifically about your dissertation or plans for dissertation and such, so that people are better informed here about you. But I'm gonna open the door and invite you back to the channel if you'd like to come back sometime. We'll continue this discussion and talk about some more topics if you like. But Very quickly, so Jim G missed the beginning, and well. Let me do this first. There's a couple really nice comments here. So Eugene Rudeman says that Daniel impresses me, especially given his age, gives me some hope for the future. Well, that's a nice compliment. That's very nice of him to say that.
Thank you.
And then Hendo, who's a long time, he's been with me in my first 10 subscribers, I believe. So he's been with me from the beginning. Hendo says, this young man sounds like an economics student that studied von Mises economics. Suspect that you have.
So yes, I've explored a lot of Austrian economics, Hayek, Mises.
Hayek is a top drawer for me.
Yes, Road to Serfdom. I read it in Spanish back in Venezuela. But I do not ascribe to like a school or anything like that. I'm probably more neoclassical than Austrian, but I still do not ascribe to any of that. I just go by the evidence, and I don't see any usefulness in like attaching to like a name of a school. I just think that math is useful, which is my problem with the Austrians. But at the same time, free markets are what's proven to work, and then we just have to study the policies, and that's basically my idea.
Well, I have, when it comes to economists, I have a few people who that come right to the top for me. Hayek is one of them, and then of course Thomas Sowell is also up there for me too.
Thomas,
he's just absolutely. Oh, there you go. You're gonna pull the book off the shelf. There you go.
I have Basic Economics right here from Thomas Sowell.
There you go. Fantastic. The man's a rock star. He's like 93 now. People said I should get him on the channel. I'd love to get him on, but I'm afraid if I bring him on, it might be the last interview ever does. How do you guys 93?
You should try. You should try before, because he's amazing. I wish I could meet him.
Yeah, well, if I get him on the channel, I guarantee you'll be watching it. So we'll see if I can get him on the channel.
Yes, I will be watching it.
Okay, so let me merge two comments here from Jim G 1000 and Tian, who's in South Africa. So Jim G says, I missed the beginning. What is Daniel's recipe to turn things around as soon as possible in Venezuela? And then Tian asks a similar question. Can Venezuela be saved in 5 to 10 years, and how? Before you answer, I say yes, but it involves removing the entire leadership and starting from scratch. You can destroy a country and take it to such a low base, but growth can come back almost overnight by simply removing these policies and letting an economy flourish and letting the free market go. So I'll let you answer it. That was my response. But you're working on a PhD, so you're probably smarter when it comes to economics.
Look, I think that you hit it right. It is exactly what you said. We just need to remove the whole regime, and we just need to end the price controls. Privatize the oil industry is completely key. If that does not happen, forget about long-term future for Venezuela. And that is if we get rid of the regime before oil becomes obsolete. And so we need to replace completely the regime, and then we need to implement a system with our price controls, with our currency controls, where the government has a balanced budget and doesn't print money to pay for the government programs, and which is what's causing inflation. And that's what we will need to do. The key there, of course, is not what we need to do economically. We all know what needs to happen. It's how to overthrow the Maduro regime, right? And the problem in Venezuela is that Venezuela was elected in 1998, Chavez. And the big issue with socialist politicians is that they get in with votes, but they have to get out with bullets. That's the only way to push them out. And the Venezuelan people are unarmed, because we never had a second amendment, which is another thing I really love about America that gives me hope about the future, is that forget about Bernie Sanders doing anything. Who has the guns in this country? The military, who are not a bunch of leftists who are controlled by the government. They're not. And a huge veteran population. Conservatives around this country have a very high gun ownership rate. This is the country with the most guns in the world. They're going to have a very tough time. National security-wise, believe me when I tell you that if the Russians ever try to invade America, they're not going to only face the American military, they're going to face the American population. And that's a very powerful deterrent. So Venezuela never had that. And it's unfortunate, because this is the moment when we need it the most. The Second Amendment was not put by the founders to hunt, was not put there even to fight crime. It was put there to avoid tyranny, to avoid what's happening in Venezuela. And some people in Venezuela, especially in the United States, think I'm very wrong, and that I'm saying dangerous things when I say that Venezuelans need to kill the Maduro regime, need to kill the murderers. It's self-defense. When you have security forces that torture individuals, you have to defend yourself. And if you don't, they're just going to oppress you forever. And they say that this is going to be a civil war. Well, America did not become independent by sending a nice letter to King George. America became independent with the Independence War, right?
We actually sent him a nasty
white shirts.
We actually sent him a nasty letter on more than one occasion before we declared independence.
And that's okay, but you ended up declaring independence and fighting a war.
Yeah.
In Venezuela today, 21 years after we've seen the atrocities of the regime, the United Nations came with a report the day before yesterday, and they're not friends of ours.
Right.
They have evidence, confirmed evidence of 5,000 individual cases of murder by security forces in the last 6 years, 5,000 that they can confirm independently, which is a huge achievement, right? Because obviously there are many times more that cannot be confirmed, of cases where the security forces got killing quotas. The high officers just told the security forces, you have to kill so many people today, figure out what you want to do. And they just killed innocent people in the street.
Absolutely crazy.
Kidnap them, torture them, rape them, everything, all this evidence is documented. You can even watch it yourself. It's insane. It's so sad. And that's why the only way out of this regime is with force. And if that can't happen from inside the country, unfortunately, we might need help from Colombia, we might need help from Brazil, we might need help from another country. You, Chris, have a lot of experience in Africa. This has happened in Africa many times when neighboring nations, I believe it was Senegal that helped Gambia become, when their presidential election was rigged. I think it's happened a lot in West Africa. And that's how basically they keep democracy between each other, right? There's like this threat that if you don't respect the election results, the other country is going to come and install the guy who won. And that's how it's going to work. I'm not sure what's going to happen at the end in Venezuela. I hope that in my lifetime it becomes free. And once it does, I'm going to be able to help keep it a capitalist country. I'll probably stay in America, but I still want to help Venezuela, of course.
Well, and you've kind of answered one of the questions that's coming up, but let me make 2 quick points here, Daniel, because we don't want to monopolize your whole day here. You've probably got to start thinking about your dissertation there in Kentucky. But one of the points you talked about immigration being bad for a country, I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, it's shameful that many African states are bereft of doctors and nurses because their countries aren't conducive to them making an adequate living for their skills or quality of life. And so the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States, shamefully, we have tens of thousands of nurses who are in our hospital systems who come from Africa because they can't succeed in Malawi, they can't succeed in South Africa. Or not just that, but also professionally, nurses are not treated with the same level of respect and responsibility in Africa that they are, say, in the Western world in many cases. So that's one thing. So immigration, in fact, can be quite bad for a country. And look at you. You're here. You're quite an intelligent young man, and you're on the right path here, I think. And it looks like America's going to... You're welcome.
I didn't have teachers in school because my teachers left the country.
That's crazy. And
there were semesters where the school just couldn't find any teacher to hire because they just left the country.
But what I'm getting at is that now America is going to profit from your human capital, which is great for us, but it's a tragedy for Venezuela. You should be in Venezuela. That's where you should be. And then you mentioned the Bill of Rights. You mentioned the Second Amendment. And what a lot of people don't seem to understand, and I think because we're ignorant on civics as a nation these days, is that the 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, were designed not to let us, as you say, go hunting or this, that, and the other, but they're designed to keep the government from encroaching on our natural rights. So the right to assembly, the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of speech. These are limits on the federal government, not on private entities, not on civil society, but this is limiting the power of the government to encroach on your liberty and your freedom. And I think that gets lost on a lot of people, and it's unique in the United States. We take this approach, and it's under assault, and that's hence the reason for this segment, Liberty Under Assault, the politics of the USA, because we see, for instance, this week on Monday when I was coming back from Wyoming, we see that the governor of Pennsylvania's draconian, what I considered at the time in February, unconstitutional lockdown measures have in fact been declared unconstitutional. I think he should do the right thing and resign from office, which he won't do because he has violated his first responsibility, and that is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and that of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and protect the public. And he has done just the opposite by destroying lives, pushing tens of thousands of people, businesses into bankruptcy and destroying the economy of the state. And he should resign, but he won't. But so that's that. The Bill of Rights, that's there to protect us from an overreaching government. And that's unique in world history, I think.
It is. That's what makes America so special. And that's why I love this country so much. Even though there are flaws, of course, nowhere else is perfect. We're not in heaven.
No.
We'll never be perfect. But this is as close as it gets. And we are continually improving. And that's good. And we're going to continue doing so. I think that what also makes America special is that nowhere else in the world we have such a high proportion of the population, people like your viewers, committed to defending freedom, committed to defending their rights. And in other places, they don't care about natural rights. What is a natural right? In Europe itself, where my parents live now in Spain, it's a cultural dependency in the state. That's what it is. And of course, there are conservatives and libertarians, but there are very, very few. There are very few people who are pro-life. There are very few people who believe the government should not be in charge of everything. There are very few of healthcare, for example, because they have been brainwashed already. Mm-hmm. They think in Spain, and I'm not kidding, that the poor people in America die without access to a hospital. All of them die in the street, and there's a huge crisis because nobody can get health insurance unless they're rich. That's a lie.
Of course,
that's
it's a lie.
It's
also
so many.
It's also a violation of the law.
The poor in healthcare than Spain needs whole population.
Yeah, no, it's also a violation of the law. I mean, hospitals are required to take someone who appears at their door. They may not want to, but they're required to.
They think it's a lie. They think that's not true. They're told that on TV continually. I've seen it myself, and that's what the government there tells them so that they support socialized medicine.
Now, I'm with you entirely on this, Daniel. I mean, I've lived in Europe and I've seen what is on European television. Of course, I speak the languages, so I know the nonsense. I know what politicians say, and I've seen it in Africa too. I have a colleague who's in New Zealand who made some comment last night on Twitter about the United States being wholly inequitable, yada yada yada, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, no, this is the most wildly successful country in the history of Homo sapiens to this point. We're not without flaws. We have warts. We make mistakes, and we make plenty of them. Listen, we imprisoned Japanese Americans based on their appearance in concentration camps in the Second World War. Vile, disgusting, democratic, by the way. We allowed the institution of slavery to survive the formation of our country and last until 1865. Vile, incorrect, but reinforced primarily by the modern Democratic Party when it came to power. We removed the Cherokee, the Seminole Indians from the southeastern part of the United States, where they lived in harmony with their neighbors and owned land and had their own constitutions and laws and such. And we forced them on the long trail of tears to Cherokees by the first Democratic president in United States history. After the Civil War, we terrorized blacks in the Deep South after the United States Army was removed as the Army of Occupation after a dozen years enforcing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We removed them, and then Jim Crow crept in. The KKK came about largely by Democrats. The list goes on and on and on here. We do have some shameful history in this country, and it is. I'm picking on Democrats. It is across all parties. We have bigots and racists and people who exploit others. But the bottom line here is that you'd be hard pressed to make a legitimate argument that's unbiased to say that this isn't the most interesting and potentially freest and most prosperous experiment in the history of mankind.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and that's why I came to the United States, and I'm very happy to be here, and that's why I work towards stopping that ideology here. And I think, as I said before, that starts in your home. That starts by teaching children well, and then that starts by talking to others, and that can be done casually. I do it with my Uber drivers. I do it with my friends, and people understand from the stories of what's happening in Venezuela, from the stories of what's happened everywhere else. And from the system here itself, veterans have a lower quality healthcare because they get government hospitals than the rest of us. And that's an example of socialism in America. Yeah. So I think there are many ways that common sense people will not agree with these socialists, and they can be persuaded. And only a small minority are really socialists in this country.
Well, let me ask you just a couple of quick questions to wrap up here. One that comes from the comments, and then another one about, see if you're still a member of, I think this is organization, the Young Americans Against Socialism. If that's the case, we'll talk about that. And then I want to ask you about your dissertation. So the first one is that you've sort of answered this, but I'm going to merge two comments, one from Shack Dweller and one from Ice ZA, ZA being South Africa, ZA, they say Z. the Anglophone countries. But ICE and Shack Dweller. So Shack Dweller says, will Daniel ever go back home, and does he see a future in politics? That's the first one. Now, the future in politics, if you do have one, I suspect it might be here in the United States. And then this one's more personal. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But does he or will he qualify for American citizenship after 5 years? I don't know the answer on that one. But if you want to answer those in any fashion you like, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, I can't return to Venezuela while the Maduro regime is in power. I know if I would, I'd probably be in jail
or dead.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked on TV here that we need to overthrow them and that we need to,
yeah.
I just said that it would be okay to kill them, know.
So I don't think you won't be welcome with open arms and a bouquet of roses and a box of chocolates at the airport in Caracas when you arrive.
Let's just say that, right? So I'm definitely not going back to Venezuela ever until the regime is out. And once the regime is out, if there's a chance for me to cooperate in the reconstruction, I would definitely be able to advise someone or do whatever I can with my expertise on economics. I'd be happy to. Other than that, unless the country becomes, if that doesn't happen and they don't want me there, or like the regime change is not a good regime change, then I'm probably not going back. I hope I get in the future to visit, because at least to visit friends, or at least to visit my old school, because those are places I miss. And I wish to go back to at least a few times, just as a tourist, whatever. Do I see a future in politics? I don't know. I interned for my senator in Indiana, Todd Young, great guy, really exceptional senator. But what I saw was that they have to put so much time of their own. They lose so much time with their families. And so it's a very taxing work for a lot of hate that you get and a lot of smears and lies about you. So I don't think I will because of that. But I probably will be involved in politics in some way or another. I love to go on TV and talk about socialism, and I love to campaign. I love to advise on things. So I may work in Congress or in the White House advising, but not like for an elected position. I don't think so. So that's how I see my future. Regarding the citizenship wise, that's why I also say it's a big problem with legal immigration. So I'm on a student visa. So no, the only way to become a citizen is if you become a permanent resident. And to become a permanent resident, you have to either, as I said before, a family member, or qualify as a refugee, a political asylee. The reason I don't qualify as a political asylee is because I'm also Italian and Spaniard. So the United States need not grant me asylum because I can go to another country. And so for me, the only way is employment-based. So I'm probably going to finish my PhD, perhaps become a college professor and do something like that, and stay here and do something, take that path to become a permanent resident and ultimately a citizen. But it's probably going to take over a decade from now.
Well, if in fact that is your path, Daniel, as I said, Venezuela's loss, our gain, and we're happy to poach the human capital from countries that fail. So now, just a couple things to wrap up here. So are you part of something called the Young Americans Against Socialism? Did I get that right?
I'm very connected with them. They're not like a campus organization. I know their name is kind of can be confused with Young Americans for Freedom or Young Americans for Liberty, which are on-campus student organizations. They're more like a nationwide organization that promotes videos and messages of people like me who escaped from socialist countries. And they do it to educate young people, right? Young Americans. So yes, I collaborate with them a lot. I watched one of their first videos. And I think that's the video you watched, Chris. The one on the bench. I was with a white shirt.
Yeah.
I remember it very clearly. Morgan Segers is the founder of the organization. You should follow her. She's great. And the organization is a really good one. And so that's my level of involvement. I just make videos and collaborate on social media.
All right. No, that's fantastic. So a couple things here that have come in. So I said I was going to cut it. But let me ask you about this before I forget. So have you already decided on a focus for your dissertation? Are you just getting started on it? How far along are you in the process? And if you are, if you have a topic already, can you just share a little idea of what you're going to do? Or maybe you have a germination of an idea?
Well, I just have an idea. The thing with the PhD program, how it works is that it's 2 years of only coursework, and then it's about 3 years of basically only research for the dissertation. It's not exactly like that, but that's a summary. And so right now I'm just doing courses. So I have an idea for my dissertation, but it can change drastically from now to 4 years. And it's about the transition from socialist countries to free market capitalist economies, and what makes that a successful transition. What factors should it be a gradual, should it be a shock transition? Which policies should be implemented first? Because we know the policies that need to happen. That's not a secret. The question is how to implement them. Right? Privatization, for example. We know we need to privatize businesses. How do we privatize them? Do we sell them on an auction? Do we give them for free to the people in equally, and then they can sell it? Like it's happened. There's different ways to privatize and sell. How do we take out the price controls all at once? How, things like that. There's a lot of, the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah. Well, or we could just take the Russian approach and hand them off to oligarchs, and then they become fabulously wealthy. That's one way to privatize.
That one we know is the wrong approach, which is why we have so many people learn from Eastern Europe.
Is that wrong? I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Yes.
So okay, thanks for sharing that. So this is a question that Ron van Rijmond, who's a viewer from the Netherlands, asked previously, and I missed it. I did see it, but let me just ask this. Got to throw this one here. Sorry to do this to you, but he said, Daniel, as a young man with Latin roots, what's your opinion about a movement like La Raza in the United States? I have a very strong opinion. I'll keep it to myself for the moment.
Okay, and I think this will be the last question because I also have to leave.
Yeah.
But I'm a huge opponent of this movement of identity politics. I don't, recently they have tried to create a new word called Latinx, which does not exist.
Exactly.
They try to make it gender neutral. Well, if they wanted to make it gender neutral, why don't you say Latin instead of Latinx? Because the X is not a vowel, that's not a word.
Yeah.
It's either Latino or Latina or that's it. And I'm sorry, Spanish is a gendered language. And I'm sorry that the American left doesn't like it. That's how it is. And that's how language works, Speak another language if you don't like it. The only thing I know about La Raza is that they try to further this movement of identity politics and basically that Hispanics are oppressed and all the story about that. And I just think that it's the reasons some groups of the population do worse off than others is that they're exposed.
Oops, your mic went quiet. What happened there?
Nation nowadays. It obviously had to do in decades ago. We know when there was slavery and things like that for at least Black people, not for Hispanics. But nowadays, if you work and you are have the same opportunities as a white person, there's no reason that discrimination is going to bring you down lower. It's really a much reduced phenomenon nowadays. And we know from economic experience that it is immigrants whose economic outcomes are a lot better than their parents because they get so much more opportunities. They move to the right places. They work harder because they are self-selected, so they're entrepreneurs. I don't see any reason why the Hispanic population would be worse off other than the government policies implemented by the left of terrible schools, of high taxes, of licensing that affects them. And when there are these entry barriers in the economy, the people who are at the bottom can't rise up and they stay at the bottom. So we just need to eliminate those entry barriers so that those people can naturally rise to the top as they should.
Excellent. Listen, Daniel, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I appreciate it today. Ladies and gentlemen, my special featured guest today has been Daniel DiMartino, a PhD candidate at Columbia University and a person who fled from socialism in Venezuela, the land of Chavez and Maduro, a bunch of lunatics on the left. But anyway, thank you so much for your time on here. But before you go, I'm going to leave you with food for thought. Marabani, Robert Dugan, who is a South African postgraduate student in the Netherlands, said, I think it would be of great benefit to South Africa for Daniel to come speak at South African campuses. I think that's probably a grand idea. Maybe that's something in the future. I'll also be traveling to South Africa. Maybe we could link up and get something together, maybe find some sponsorship and go down there. But I will tell you this, Daniel, if we do that, we're going to need to carry body armor because the behavior on South African campuses is even worse than it is on at UC Berkeley, where they try to staunch free speech. Now,
I would love to go to South Africa. I would love to go to Africa in general. I've never been. And, I'm very excited to see how it is, to know what the people think. because that continent is really the future of the world. Is the continent that is growing the fastest.
Yep.
And I think they have a very promising future if they implement the right policies. And I wish they did, because a lot of people need it, and we need to get out a lot of people from poverty in Africa. And I'm sure they are all entrepreneurs and very great people. So we need to give them the opportunities that we have here to make it in their own countries.
Well, I agree. So look, maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe something can come of that. We'll see for the future about it.
Yeah, I'm interested.
It would be fantastic.
Let's connect on that.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my special feature guest, Daniel DiMartino. Thanks for your time, Daniel. Appreciate it for your appearing here on Liberty Under Assault, my segment on USA politics. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. I'm going to put you in the waiting room there, and you can drop off if you like, or I can call you back. But I did want to touch base with you here shortly, if you don't mind. Where's this at? There it is. I'll put you in the waiting room. All right. We're going to say goodbye to Daniel, and I'll wrap up the show here in just a second. All right. There, he's out. Let me fix my screen, folks, because that's a little funky looking there. You know how that works. All participants. Here we go. That should fix it. There we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been brilliant, absolutely wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it. Daniel DiMartino, a very intelligent young man who escaped from the misery of Venezuela, where people are eating out of trash cans and fighting each other with knives for the scraps found in trash cans. A once prosperous country in Latin America, a country with a wealth of mineral resources and human capital that benefited immensely from positive immigration, as he talked about, from his parents' time coming to Venezuela, increasing the country by 20% in size, and it kept growing from there. But it's been destroyed by socialists. And we have these lunatics here in America who seem to think that this time we'll get it right, just this time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they never get it right. Don't give them the opportunity to get it right. Exercise your constitutionally protected rights here in America under the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, giving you the right to freedom of assembly, the right to seek redress from your government, the right to keep and bear arms, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Those are rights guaranteed to us, are natural rights that the government cannot take from us. And they've been taking it from us. So hang in there. And this has been a special feature on Liberty Under Assault. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate the comments, the questions, the super chats, and also Daniel, my profuse thanks for your wonderful appearance on the channel. He's welcome back at a future date at any time. We'll discuss things again. And I like Marabani's idea about him going to campuses in South Africa. That sounds interesting. Okay, folks, I'll be back on for the Night Owl edition later today at 9:35 South Africa time, Botswana time, 3:35 Eastern Standard. So I'll put that post up here shortly. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys a little bit later. So thank you so much for tuning in. And this has been a very exciting 2 days for me personally. We had Dr. Victor Davis Hanson on the channel yesterday, followed by State Representative Dawn Kiefer from the 92nd District of Pennsylvania, my representative. And today, Daniel DiMartino, an economist and a PhD candidate from Columbia University who knows a little something about socialism. All right, folks, thanks a lot. I'm going to close out here. I appreciate everybody tuning in. And please tune in later. It'll be a Lekker Lekker Freitagnacht. And we'll be playing Giselle this evening and touching base and talking a little bit more about the Fairview incident in South Africa, the butchering of racehorses by fanatics in South Africa, as well as some video clips about some interesting things taking place here in the United States, folks. God bless and have a lovely afternoon or evening wherever you find yourself. And I'll catch you back here shortly. Whoops, got to turn those off. There we go. Here we go.